Well, good morning. How about that choir? That was awesome. Man, what a morning. Well, welcome. It's great to have all of you here, everyone joining us online. And as we kind of start off this new season of life, I know it's not like the beginning of the year, but this time of year, it kind of feels like that as we're kind of starting into some new things. And what I want to talk about is just, I want all of us to be forward thinking this morning and thinking about Casas and where Casas is going. And I want to just kind of lay out a vision for where I think Casas is taking us and what I want to have you be a part of. And as I was thinking about all of this, I was thinking about some stats. And I love to kind of look at some of the research stats on Americans and religion and spirituality, some of the things that are happening. And there's been this interesting stat that they have, researchers have followed for a long time. And it started off of something that was just just an extra box to check if you didn't fit any of the other boxes. And they would ask people, what's your religious affiliation? What do you believe about spiritual things? Where do you go to church? All that stuff. And if someone was just like, well, I've got nothing, and it's just, you would check the box none. Well, that group of people that really for the longest time didn't add up to hardly anything, researchers didn't look at it much, suddenly started growing to a point where it's like, we got to pay attention. And so they get called the nuns, right? Because they checked the none box on this. And there's kind of this stat that churches should really be paying attention to, that we've watched now for a couple of decades just continue to climb. And that group in the United States that would say, don't have anything to do with church or religion, climbed from a few percentage points to now well over 28% of the population. But the interesting thing that I found this week as I was looking back at this is within that group of nuns, okay, it used to be that like 90% of them, 90+% of them, the reason they checked none was because they said, I have no church affiliation because I don't really believe in God, or I'm really skeptical about my belief in God. That has changed substantially. It's now somewhere around only 30% of them would say the reason I have no affiliation with church or spiritual things is because I struggle with a belief in God. The vast majority of them actually have some sort of belief or longing toward God. And this is no small population. This is like 93 million people in our country would say, I believe in God. I've got an inkling towards spiritual things. I just don't think the church is a place to help me work that out. That's the thing that I want us to notice, see? And the reality is, I thought about this. It just feels like it's getting harder and harder for people to find God. I see this in conversations. Maybe you've experienced this. Talking with someone and they'll say something along the lines of like, I want to connect with God, or I'm trying to figure the God thing out. I thought about church, and then you watch this conversation as they talk about like, I see all the scandals, or I tried going to church and it just seemed like just a pile of all of these things, and it never got to God in a way that I could understand or get my arms around. Or my struggle is, there's somebody in my life that I love or that I care about, and I know that there's something about them, something they believe or whatever it is, and I know they wouldn't be welcome at that church. And it's so hard to go when I know there's someone I care about who couldn't even go with me. Ever have a conversation like that? And maybe some of you, you're like, I'm kind of in the middle of one of those. I'm trying to figure this thing out. And I'd say, man, I'm glad you're here. But you see this struggle. And again, it just seems like it's getting harder and harder for people to find God. And too often, as you have those conversations, as you look at the stats, so many of the things that keep getting in people's way feels like it's things that Christians and churches too often are putting in the way. Not on purpose, but it's happening. I talked with a mom who struggled through this, and she told me a bunch about her story. She grew up in a home, no one in her family went to church, but she had a childhood friend and her family went to church. And so she ended up going to church with her friend. And at first it was kind of a good experience because she said she was so curious about God, wanted to know all about God. But it just became evident that because her family didn't go to church, there were lots of things she didn't know, and she was always trying to catch up, and she always just felt like she was on the outs. And she stayed with this church all the way through childhood and through her teens. But somewhere in there, she had this moment where she was trying to understand more and was trying to be a part of this Bible study. And once again, she kept running into this thing where she just felt like she wasn't enough. She didn't have all the right answers. She needed to do more. And someone, and again, young girl, she was told, you kind of need to know your place. Kids should be seen but not heard, is what she was told. And she said, even though I was a young kid, that just made me feel like I would never be enough. And she said, unfortunately, even as I got into my teen years and was a part of the youth group there and everything, I always tried hard. But it's like I would try hard and I would feel like I was getting closer to that place where like I was good enough. Maybe I get included in another way, or God will really, really like me. And it's like there was always one more thing. Like no matter how far I got, there was always one more thing I always needed to do. And she said it started to hurt so much that by the time she was like a senior in high school, she said, I just stopped going and never went back. Gets married. Her husband had kind of a similar situation where he had lots of questions and doubts and found out that his church, like there was no room to ask questions about doubts and some of the teachings in the church or whatever. And he's like, I don't even know if I believe in God anymore. She said, so here we were like the perfect match. We kind of both felt burned by church a little bit and it was great until, guess what? Start having kids. And she said one day, her oldest, her son, who was now early in elementary, starts asking questions about God. And she's like, oh my gosh, like he doesn't know anything about this. And she goes, and I realized even though I felt hurt by church, like there were all of these things that I learned and understood from church, and he doesn't have, my kids are missing this. She's like, I was really torn over how do I do this where I want them to be exposed to God in some way because she still believed in God. She said, but I was really fearful about like, I don't want them to get hurt in church. And she was just torn over this whole thing, but finally decided I need to take my kids to church. So she loads up her kids. She takes them to church. It wasn't the church she grew up in because it was in another city, but the same denomination. Shows up at church, drops one of her kids off at the preschool, and the other one didn't know where to take her child for classes or whatever, and just said, just come with me into church. And so they get in there, and you got to picture this. A young kid in elementary, he's never been in church before. He's got lots of questions while simultaneously being very bored, right? It's just like, well, why are they doing that? And she said she's trying to walk this through with him for the very first time, knowing he's being exposed to all this stuff. And she said, someone sitting in front of me turned around and said directly to my son, kids should be seen and not heard. And she said, I panicked. She said, it hurt. I couldn't believe it. She said, all of that hurt that I had going all the way back just rushed forward. And she said, in my panic, I just got up, took my son, got my other child out of the preschool, got in our car, and just started bawling and drove home. And I just go, like churches, like we've got to do better. Like there's this thing that somehow something gets lost in all of this. And you just feel it. It's getting harder and harder for people to find God. And so this morning, I want to talk about a vision, about where I want to see us go, because I want us to be a very different kind of expression of what a church is about. And as we think about, looking forward, I want to put a time frame on it this morning. I want you to think about the next 5 years. And the reason I say 5 years is because 5 years is like short enough that you feel like, man, well, let's get on something. Let's get something done. 5 years, you feel like that it's still kind of in front of you. But 5 years is also long enough that it's like you've got time to do something significant. Like some of you, you've got freshmen that are just going into high school, right? In 5 years from now, keep your fingers crossed, like they'll be done, right? It's exciting to think in 5 years we'll have gone through another election, right? That's something to look forward to. It's just, 5 years, a lot can happen in 5 years, but also it's short enough to say, but changes can happen now. Like we can start moving towards this now. So as we think about this, I want you to imagine 5 years from now, right? 5 years from now, if there's a mom like that mom, that we would be a church, that a mom like that would say, I'm gonna look to that place, and that we would be a gift to that mom or anybody that is seeking to find God. If you're here today and you're like, I'm wrestling with this, maybe you've been a Christian your whole life, but something has happened in your life. There are questions, there are doubts, there's pain. Instead of a church that just like shames you for being in that place, wouldn't you love a church that says, that's okay, we'll walk with you. God is big enough to walk with you through all of those things, see? Because we're all going to find moments where we're trying to make our way. And we need a church that doesn't get in the way. We need a church that can make a way. And I want you to think about our vision in that way, okay? That we don't want to be a church that gets in the way, but that is making a way. And here's what I want to do. As you think about this, I want to look at a passage in the New Testament where you literally have the disciples themselves asking about, what's the way? How are we gonna know the way? Because I think that's a question for sure people who don't know God yet ask at times, but we as followers of Christ at times ask this question, okay, like what's our way? How do we make a way forward? So let me set this passage up for you. This passage is taking place where Jesus has his disciples with him. This is in the upper room. He is just a few hours away from being arrested. And so he's got his disciples with him. And here's how I want you to think about this. To really get into this story, I want you to imagine just for a little bit that you're a disciple of Christ, okay? And that you're in this upper room and there's a lot that's been going on. But remember this, if you are a disciple of Christ, you would see Jesus as your rabbi. And there would be there was this whole tradition of how this works. So for the last 3 years, Jesus has been your rabbi, which means wherever your rabbi goes, that's where you go. This is just how this worked, right? Your rabbi would get up in the morning, and if you're gonna go to a new city, your rabbi goes to a new city, you go to a new city. If you stay because your rabbi stays. This is, right? Your rabbi was like your Google Maps in life, right? And so if you were a disciple of Christ, Jesus was your Google Maps. Everywhere you went, you just went where Jesus was. Jesus was your moral compass. He was like your Jiminy Cricket, your North Star, your rock, whatever metaphor you want to use. Jesus as your rabbi showed you. When it came to how do you treat people, you watched your rabbi and you followed him. How do you deal with religious leaders that are trying to pin you down in theological arguments and all of these things? You watched your rabbi. Every moment of your life was about following your rabbi. For 3 years, think about this, right? You're sitting in this room, and for 3 years, you haven't had to decide once where you would go the next day, because your job was just to follow your rabbi. Imagine that for a moment, right? But this is where you are. So Jesus is in the upper room, and here's what he knows that has not sunk into the disciples yet. That in a few hours, he's gonna be arrested. He is going to die on a cross. And this group of disciples, for the first time in 3 years, this is you're in this room. You've not decided where you're gonna go the next day once in the last 3 years. But by tomorrow morning, you won't have your rabbi. What's your way? How are you gonna decide what you do tomorrow? How are you gonna decide what you're going to do the next day? And if you can put yourself in that situation, you should be feeling really nervous right now. You should be asking, okay, what does this mean? What do you mean you're going to leave us? If you want, turn to John chapter 13. We're gonna spend most of our time in John 14, but John 13, sets this up. John 13, verse 36. Peter realizes something is up in this. Verse 36 says, Simon Peter asked, Lord, where are you going? Right? What do you mean you're leaving? And this is the question we'd all be asking. You're going where? Where are you going? Why can't we go with you? Verse 37, Jesus replied, where I am going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later, right? And if you've been following him everywhere for the last 3 years, this is a scary moment. All of a sudden, it's like, what do you mean? I can't follow you. In this moment, it's like you have just lost Google Maps, right? Your North Star has gone dark. What do you do in this moment? Ever have a moment in your own spiritual journey with God where something happened and you prayed? And you just felt like, God, where are you? You've prayed and you've asked him for help, or maybe you went through something difficult and there was that feeling of but why didn't God act in a different way? And you felt that sense of loss or wonder or worry. That's what they're going through in this moment. What's more though, is Jesus understands what they're going to face tomorrow that maybe hasn't fully dawned on them yet. Because he has been their way, he's gonna get arrested and he's gonna die. And when he dies, it's gonna feel like their way goes away. There were other people before Jesus that rose up that Rome was threatened by, that the religious leaders were we can't let this go on. And when they killed those individuals, you know what happened to their movement? It was gone. It disappeared. That way was no more. And the idea that Jesus would die, these disciples, it would feel like their way just died. And Jesus understands there's gonna be other compelling things in their life that are gonna clamor to be the new way. If you're a disciple of Jesus, one of the things that you're gonna go through in this whole thing is we've been fighting off all of these other voices that say, no, this is the way, this is the way. Rome has done this. The religious leaders have done this. Those would have been two of the loudest voices. And all of a sudden, right, and you've been hanging on to Jesus. No, Jesus is the way. And then Jesus dies. All of a sudden, it's going to feel like Rome won. The religious leaders won. It's going to feel like they were totally validated. And what Jesus is understanding, the temptation to lose your way and to pick one of these other ways is going to be overwhelming, right? And so here's what Jesus says. He's preparing them for this because he knows what's coming. So here's what he says. Flip over to John 14. And this is what I want us to look at here this morning. John 14, starting in verse 4. He says this, and again, if you're in that room, everyone is freaking out, right? There's a lot of panic in this room. Verse 4. Jesus says this, you know the way to the place where I am going. Calm down. You know the way to the place that I'm going, right? Now just picture the disciples. We have no idea where you're going. How do we know the way if we don't know where you're going? Look at verse 5. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. So how, right? And we would all be asking this question. If we don't know where you're going, how can we know the way, right? How will we know what to do? How will we know what to do tomorrow morning? How will we connect back with you? How will we find God, right? How does this work? You can just feel the panic and all of this stuff. And then I love what Jesus says next. Look at this, look at verse 6. And Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, right? Listen, he's saying, okay, I understand you think you don't know the way, but I am the way. Now here's why this is so powerful, friends, is because what Jesus is saying here is not this highfalutin theoretical theology, right? He's not trying to make something great for a t-shirt, although it would be great on a t-shirt, right? Or a poster or whatever. But his point is he's not trying to say this, wonderful thing that, we'll put on a poster someday. This is practical. Right? If you've followed him for 3 years and have yet to have to decide in those 3 years what you're going to do tomorrow, The thing you're wondering right now, like, where are we gonna eat? What are we gonna do? Like, how does this, and what I want you to see is he's giving them a practical way forward. And if we can understand that, all of a sudden we begin to understand this is our way too. See, what he's saying is, you do know the way. Because for 3 years you watched me. For 3 years you got to watch what I did, and the way of me for all of those years, when you wake up tomorrow morning, nothing has changed. You wanna know what God is like? You know what he's like. You know the way because you've watched me and I'm like the Father. You wanna know how to treat people? You know the way because you've watched me. You wanna know how to move forward? Like what you hang on to move forward? You know the way because you have watched me. I am your way. I am your truth. I am your life. That doesn't change. Do you see what he's doing here in this moment? And friends, like this is really powerful. Because all of a sudden, what you come back to is, it's like, this is the beauty of why God sent Jesus in the flesh into our world. There is so much we see in the person of Jesus that shows us the way for us. This is our way. But understand, Jesus says this because he knows it will be easy for them to lose their way. And we've all experienced this. He knows they're gonna wake up tomorrow morning and there are gonna be groups like the religious leaders, Roman officials, and what they're gonna be clamoring for and looking like, it's gonna look like those are the ways that we need to go. It is so easy. And I wanna articulate these two ways that it becomes easy for us to lose our way, because I think this happens easily for churches. So let me go through these two, and then I want to come back to that vision of where we're going as a church. And this is the first one, right? It's easy to just choose another way. We lose our way because it's just easy to choose another way that looks like it works, like it's effective. I want you to think about Rome for a moment, right? Rome was a master of power and control. They knew how to manipulate things politically. They knew how to use their troops to do whatever. Like they were masters of persuasion and control and power. And if you looked at that and said, what's the best way to get something done? Well, it sure did look like Rome knew what to do, doesn't it? Because they would crush their enemies. They would outmaneuver their enemies politically. They got things done. And if you're one of Jesus's apostles and it looks like Jesus has just died and his way has gone away, it'd be really easy to just go, well, maybe that is a better way. Maybe that way actually gets something done, right? And so there's this temptation to say, well, maybe control, maybe power, maybe grabbing a hold of, power and politics is the way the church could move forward. Maybe that's the thing that we could do that would advance the kingdom. I mean, like Rome used power and control. They did it for bad things. But if the church were to take, power and politics and used it for a good thing, like, isn't that okay? What's the harm in that? And there's this thing where it can be tempting to move in that direction. But I want to pause for a second, because I know for some of us, it can be easy to just be like maybe just a little bit of political activism on the part of the church would be a good thing, right? And let me pause also and say this. What I'm not saying is that politics is inherently bad, or that Christians should not be involved in politics. In fact, I think there's a part of being a citizen that every Christian, vote your conscience, be involved with politics. If that's something you want to do, I think that is a good thing, because every society is gonna have politics and needs it. It's a part of it. But here's where we get this confused. That is not the way of Jesus, and it is not the way the church advances its agenda. And it can be so tempting sometimes to say, but that way seems so effective. Why shouldn't the church use a little bit of this to advance its good thing? I mean, what would have happened if the apostles, let's say the apostles after Jesus' death would have just said, we've got an opportunity here. Why don't we rally all the people around, Jesus' death. We could use Jesus' death as this rally call. I mean, think about a week earlier, the whole city came out for his triumphal entry. And if we could get that group of people to rise up, what if they put pressure on Caesar and got Caesar to say, well, man, Pontius Pilate's lost control over there. And we could get Caesar to actually kick Pontius Pilate out of his job and put like one of the other apostles into his job. What if one of the apostles would have become the governor of Israel way back when? And there's a part of it you just go, I mean, that sounds crazy, but like, wouldn't that do some good things? What if that apostle said, you know what we're gonna do? Okay, time to make laws. We're gonna take Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and that will become the new law of the land. How could that be a bad thing? But here's the deal, friends. Here's what you have to know. If they do that, it might be a movement that speaks about Jesus, lifts Jesus up, but it will look like Rome. And when there are people that are trying to find their way to God, and they show up to a church that maybe talks about Jesus but looks like Rome, they're gonna get up and they're gonna go home. Because the people knew what Rome was like. They'd experienced Rome. See, that's the problem. It's not our way. It's a way for something else, but it is not the church's way. It is not how we advance the kingdom of God. And when we become tempted to use that, we start to look a lot like Rome. The other way that it just becomes an easy way to lose our way is when it gets cluttered. It's easy to just clutter up the way. When you think about the religious leaders, think about the religious leaders in Jesus' day. And they were all about a kind of religious morality, right? It was all about all of the hoops and all of the rules and all of the lists and all of the things that you needed to do. For them, it was like, okay, we move something good forward by defining right and wrong, and we're gonna call people to, we're gonna make all the lists and all of the things and just begin piling all of that stuff up. And there's a part of it where you feel kind of the power in that, right? We've all felt moments where there was a rule that we broke, or someone looked at us with like, I can't believe you did that. And we're just like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. And you just feel like there's a kind of power to religion, isn't there? There's kind of, right? A moralistic religion has this thing where you kind of feel the pressure. That was that mom in the story that I talked about earlier. And there's a part of it too where we worry, right? Have you ever had a moment where you just feel like, man, if we just rest back on faith and love, it just feels like we kind of open the door loosey-goosey for people to think about their spiritual life as having a license to sin. And are we gonna just turn loose a bunch of people to just have a license to sin? And they like maybe a little bit of moralistic religion would be a good thing. And we could move the church forward with a little bit of moralistic religion. But it's interesting. When you look at Jesus, every time the religious leaders tried to pin him down on a rule or a religious thing, he always flipped it back around to, you have to trust me. You have to act in love. You have to live in faith in this moment. He constantly pushed back on that. Writers of the New Testament say, I get how you see the power of what moralistic religion does, but here's how Paul writes about it. He says, in the end though, it is a curse. It pulls you into striving and works, and it becomes a curse. It clutters up Jesus's way. I think about that mom, and all through her young adult, not her young adult, all through her childhood, she kept running into hoops and lists and all of those things. And at the end of the day, it became a curse that pushed her out. And what she really needed was to see a clear picture of Jesus. And here's the thing, friends. When a church clutters the way, with religious hoops and lists. They can talk about Jesus, they can sing about Jesus, but they will smell like empty religion. And when someone is saying, I want to connect with God, I want to know if there's something real out there, I want to know if there is a God who would even want to know me, and if they show up to a church and it smells like religion, they're going to get up and they're going to get in their car and they're going to go home. I want us to be a different expression of a church, friends, right? The world needs a different kind of church. So I want to talk to you about where we're headed. You know, we have a mission. You've heard us talk about our mission in the past. We have this mission that we want to love people into the acceptance and freedom of Jesus Christ. We want to be the kind of church where I want to see people grown up spiritually here, embracing all of that. But I want to be the kind of church where we're moving people into that acceptance and freedom of Jesus Christ. And the question becomes, how do we do that? How do we go about moving people in that way? Because we could grab a hold of some power and control. We could grab a hold of, right, some power in politics. We could say, the way we're going to do this is like we're going to dive into our society, but we're going to work through the way our culture works to make them, right? We're going to try and move things through laws and voting and political pressure. And we're going to try to get everything around us to look like us. Even if they don't want it, we'll force it. We'll get it there. And that will help move people into the acceptance and freedom of Jesus. That'd be one way to do it. Another way to do it would be like, okay, we're gonna lay out all of the do's and don'ts. We're gonna, with crystal clarity, we're gonna put every hoop and every list, everything they possibly need. So when they come in, there is clarity on what all of this stuff is. And they will see and feel all those hoops and lists, and that will move them toward acceptance and freedom in Jesus Christ. And see, the truth is, I think about that and I go, I don't think so. And what I would come back to is, what if our way, I want you to have a vision of what would happen if in the next 5 years, we moved more and more fully to a kind of vision that said, what if it is as simple as Jesus is our way? What we see, what he modeled, what he taught, what he pointed to, what if that simply becomes our way? And it's really interesting in this story, Jesus walking through, and they are like dancing on a hot tin roof. They are so nervous. Their rabbi is going to disappear, and they're like, what are we going to do? And all these things. I love what happens they get to the end of this conversation, Jesus walking through this whole thing, right? I am the way. I am your truth. I am your life, right? You're going to be okay. And then he says this in verse 23. He says this, and I want you to look at this in verse 23. He says this. He says, Jesus replied, right? It's going to be okay, guys. It's going to be okay. Anyone who loves me will obey my teachings, he says. And the word for teachings there in Greek is the word logos. And logos, the essence of logos here would mean way more than just some of these teachings here. It captures the idea, the entire divine way of being and way. This is what he's saying is, right? If you step into my way, my truth, and my life, trust that. That's what he's asking for here. Here's what he says next. If you do that, my Father will love them, right? So if a church group, my Father will love them, and we, right? Jesus saying, me, the Holy Spirit, God the Father, right? We will come to them and isn't this beautiful? And make our home with them. What he's saying is, when I become your way, it's like God shows up and says, I'm gonna make your church like a little vacation home, right? I'm gonna hang out. I'm gonna make my home right there with you. And here's the idea behind this. If God is right there with you, he's a part of it. What happens when someone shows up? They don't see Rome. They don't see empty religion. What do they see? God. It's like what he's saying is like, this is the moment, trust me with my way. And there's a vision of like, if we trust God in this way, it's like God saying, oh man, I love it when a church does this. Like, I'm gonna go make my home in that place. And this, friends, becomes a vision for us. Our vision, right? I want you to think about the next 5 years is gonna be guided by, we're gonna live out our mission, right? Moving people into the acceptance and freedom of Jesus Christ by trying more and more to understand Jesus's way and walking that out constantly. And I wanna talk about 3 aspects. I'm gonna just make it a little bit more specific here. I wanna talk about 3 aspects that I see where I want us to go as a church in the way we walk out our mission. And I know we can do this because I'm gonna give you a snapshot, just a brief picture of what I've watched happen in this church. So that mom that I told you about early on, got up, got in her car with her kids, starts bawling. And she told me, she said, I started driving down the road. I didn't know what else to do but go home. I could. She goes, I want them to know God. But I am so afraid that I will do to them what was done to me. And I can't live with myself if I'm the one that caused some sort of spiritual abuse with my own kids. And she says, I'm in this tension between, I want them to know God, but I don't want something bad to happen. So I am bawling my eyes out in the car. And then my kids are like, Mom, why are you crying? And then my kids start crying, they're crying. And then I'm crying more because they're crying. And she says, I'm driving down the road and we're just bawling. And the road she was driving down was La Cholla. And she drove past our sign, going down the road. Everyone in the car is bawling. And I think at that time, I think this is right. I think our theme at that moment was Your Story Matters. Any of you remember when we did Your Story Matters? And I guess we had a banner or something out there underneath our sign that just said, Your Story Matters. And she drives by and she goes, there's this church that has a sign that says Your Story Matters. And I feel like my story hasn't mattered. And she gets down to the intersection, goes through the intersection, and she goes, in total desperation, I did a U-turn on La Cholla and came back through the intersection and drove back into this church because I was just desperate. She said the service had already started and I felt guilty because I was late and I didn't want to turn my kids loose. And so I go up and she goes, and I got up to the sidewalk over here and she said, they treated me so sweet. She said, they told me they were glad I was here and didn't care that I was late. And I told them I wanted to stay with my kids, and they said, that's fine, but you should talk with someone over here with the children's ministry because they can tell you about the children's ministry. She said, I went over there, and they said, would you like to see one of the classrooms? She said, well, okay. And she said, they walked me down to visit where my kids would end up going. And I watched what was going on, and I let my kids go into the children's ministry. And she said, then that person walked with me over to the service. And then she goes, and I have no idea if you were any good that day, Glenn, because I didn't hear a word you said. She said, because the whole time I was in that service through the music and the message, the only thing I could think about was, are my kids gonna find God or are they gonna get hurt? And she said, so as soon as the service was over, I made a mad dash and I got over there, and she said, and they liked it. They liked it, and they were willing to come back. And so she said, I brought them back, and she brings them back several times, and they're liking it, and she's finally getting comfortable. And then she told me this. She said, there was a moment when I was she was right back over here that she pointed. She said, I was back there, and it was in the middle of a service, and all of a sudden, it was like just a wave of God hit me, and I realized something that I had not realized. She said, for these many weeks that I had been coming to the church, the whole time, all I could think about were my kids. I want my kids to connect with God. And I was ready for you guys to just do something stupid, and I was out of here, right? And she goes, all of a sudden I'm sitting back there and I realized how much I needed this. And she said, I started crying again in the middle of the service because I realized how much I needed this. And my husband started to notice what it was doing for me. And so he showed up for Fall Fest. And he liked that enough. And I think he came back for our Christmas service. And eventually he started showing up here on Sundays. And I tell you this story because it's a picture, it's a snapshot of who we are as a church, okay? So I wanna walk through these three things because I've watched this in you all as a church. I've watched this again and again and again, but here's my challenge. I want something more because I think our world needs it right now. And what I just see it. There's too many Christians and too many churches, and it's not all. There are some fantastic churches out there. There are some fantastic Christians out there. But I just feel like there's too many examples these days of churches and Christians that are grabbing onto another way that just feels like an easier way. But it's not Jesus's way. And our world needs more churches that when people show up, what they look like is Jesus in this, okay? So here are three aspects, okay? And I want you to think about this again in this 5-year time period, right? Okay, so 5 years from now, I want you to imagine the average person who's trying to find God in our city, right? Oro Valley, Tucson, Marana, Vail, whatever. Let's make it Southern Arizona, right? The average person who's trying to find their way to God. I want them to know that there's a church that they can drive to that is safe, that they can get a good picture of God. You know what makes me sad about the story that I told you? Is that she didn't know where to go. And she showed up to some place that just created another wound. And had she not made that U-turn, I have no idea where she would be right now, right? And it's just like, I want us to be known, right? And not because it's about, making a great reputation for us or our ego or anything like that. I just want us to be a church that has enough of a reputation that 5 years from now, anybody in this city that goes, man, I want to connect with God, that they would know there's a church called Casas, and I think that's a place I could go. And what they would do is help me. That mom, the day she showed up at the other church, all she needed was a church that would help her with her kids. That's all. Let's be a church, right? 5 years from now, let's have that reputation that that's where anyone would want to go. And if there are other churches doing that, let's celebrate that as well, right? So that's the first one. Second one is this, and this has to do with our faith related to the vision here. And it's this. I want you to imagine Casas in 5 years is a shining example that churches do not need the power of Rome, right? Or the moralism of religion to make a difference in this world or to transform a human life. There are too many, sorry, I'm passionate about this. I do not, right? There are so many churches today that feel like, right? You see the world and it feels like the world is on fire and it feels like the church needs to get power, right? Political power or something. And that's how we'll change the world. That's how we'll affect change. And I just want to say, I want us in 5 years, wouldn't you love to be a shining example that you don't need that kind of power? You don't need that kind of power. You don't need all the rigors of empty religion to change a human heart or to move someone closer to God. I want us to be a shining example that faith in Jesus Christ, following him in love, is actually the most powerful thing that can change the world or a human heart. I want us to be living proof, right, to the city around us that this way, Jesus's way, actually works, okay? That's all I want, just in 5 years, okay? That's right. And the third thing, I want you to imagine, and this has to do with love, how we think about love, right? I want you to imagine in 5 years that there's a different kind of view of love that just comes to dominate not just us as a church, right? But that we have influence in this. Because here's what happens with love. So often, I hear this all the time. It's like, oh yeah, love is great. Love is great. It's that thing for new Christians, right? Love is that elementary beginner level thing. Love is teachings for immature Christians. But as you grow, you begin to understand, sure, we still do the love thing, but we move into the deeper stuff. And I don't know what gospel they're reading, right? But what Jesus, the challenges he lays out about love and the power of love and to change everything, I want that to change. I want you to imagine, here's the thing, right? Here's the vision. In 5 years, I want us to be a church where everyone who calls Casas their church home believes that love is their superpower. That's what I want. I want us to all, I want us to be a church where we go, we've got this superpower and it's called love. And it has the ability to change people. It has the ability to change me. If I want to grow spiritually, my superpower is love. If I want to work, come alongside someone else that is struggling or hurting in life, you know what my superpower is? At work or at the office or in my neighborhood or at school, your superpower is not religion. Your superpower isn't anything that we could affect politically. Your superpower is love. That can change things. And I just think that if in 5 years we get to the place where we really believe that and embody that fully, look out, right? Because then we will be a force to reckon with, not because of our political power, not because of all of our rules, but because we can affect human hearts at the deepest place and because we'll be changing. Do you see the difference in that? The world needs a different kind of church. And here's what I'll close with this thought. Jesus is the way, which means we have a way. So let's not lose our way, friends. I'm gonna close here. Before I do, let me just say this. If you're a guest this morning, it is so good to have you here. And now you know where we're headed. So you may go, I'm out of here. Or you may go, I may come back again, right? But seriously, if you're a guest here this morning, I mean this. It is so good that you're here. I'm gonna be right over here. I would love to meet you. If you're here this morning, whether you're brand new or you've been here a long time and you wanna know about groups, maybe thinking about signing up or wanna get some more information, come right over here because we've got some people that'll help you with groups. If you're here this morning and there's something going on in your life, whether you're hurting or excited or whatever, but you just say, I'd love to have someone pray with me or for me, we'd love to do that. We have some wonderful people in our prayer place that would love to do that. Why don't you stand? Let me close this in prayer this morning. Let me pray. So God, we just come before you right now, and we as a church just embrace, however much we struggle with it at moments or times or whatever, but what we embrace, God, is your way. And we pray that you would just infuse your way, Jesus's way, into our hearts and into everything that we do, that we can experience what it is like to be a church where you are our truth and you are our life. And we pray this in his name, amen. Have a great morning. See you next Sunday.